This podcast is brought to you by Amusement Warehouse Magazine, the industry's largest trade publication. We cover amusement parks, carnivals, fairs, festivals, history, safety columns. We really got it all when it comes to the amusement business. Only remaining print publication in the amusement industry on a regular basis. So if you're interested in what the amusement industry has to offer, subscribe today. You can subscribe by logging on to amusementwarehouse.com, carnivalwarehouse.com, or amusementparkwarehouse.com. Delighted today to have the CEO of the Erie County Fair in upstate New York, Jessica Underberg, with us. Jessica, welcome.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. America's County Fair up there. So I was reading a little bit about you.
Uh-oh.
Don't get nervous. You've got a long history with the fair. You showed when you were a kid, and you really, you're like a lifer with you were destined to have this role, it sounds like.
Kind of seems like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Grew up on a dairy farm, and as a dairy farm kid, we were involved in 4-H. We didn't vacation at all when we were kids because of the dairy farm. But our vacation was getting to come and show our livestock and our 4-H projects at the fair. So I've always said that the fair is my Disney. So having the opportunity to work here is pretty spectacular for me.
Have you actually gotten to go to Disney?
I have.
So you were showing animals, and then you finally beat the unbeatable Freddie Bond, I understand.
That is true, and that plaque still hangs on my wall today, right there.
We actually have him coming on as a special guest to talk about that tragedy in his life when you beat him.
I love it. So the actually funnier part of that story is, and I credit Freddie for making me a better livestock showman, because it was always Freddie, then Jessica, Freddie, then Jessica. And I walked out of the ring one year and I looked at my parents and said, that's it. Next year it's mine. And so I worked so hard that year, and I won Master Showman, and I finally beat Freddie Bond. But the funny part of that is his dad sponsored my plaque, his dad's business. So it actually says donors, Bonds meets. But Freddie made me better, and so did other exhibitors that pushed me harder to be better than I was at the time. And so I'm appreciative of that. I tell that story every time I do a talk. And one time Fred's dad was in the audience. And so we had a lot of fun with that, because they said, Mr. Bond, this isn't just because you're here. I tell this every time.
Hey, beat his son. What's Freddie doing today? Did he take over the business, or is he?
I don't know. I have not seen him in a number of years. Well, you'll know because you're going to interview him soon.
I heard he was devastated, retired from the business. He does non-animal things now. You know, it's funny. You talk about animals and animal shows, because I've been intrigued for this for a while. I've been around a lot of fairs, ran quite a few, and I had Marla Calico on a couple of weeks ago, and I thought she was going to yell at me when I said this, but she actually was 100% in my corner with it. But I've wandered into. I'm not I grew up in New Jersey, and right outside of New York, so I didn't have a lot of agricultural background, but. During these fairs, sometimes I'll go to a state fair and sometimes county fairs or other places, and I'll wander into the judging places where they're doing the thing. And I feel like I am so lost, because they don't have a lot of like explanation for what's going, like, are they looking for a fuzzy tail? Are they looking for, a fat belly? Are they looking for ears? I don't know. The ones I think are win, lose. And I have no idea why. And I was asking her, is there a way, maybe if it's only a couple of the contests, to kind of explain, like have color commentary. I think she talked about, where people can understand a little better, because I would be interested, but I just have no ideas. Like as a Martian, I was watching basketball for the first time. I just had no idea what was going on. And with your background, you might be a great person to really, you probably already do it, but I don't know. But I think that's a great place. Some fairs can make some improvement on just understanding to the novice about what's going on.
You're right, Ron. And I think sometimes as fairs and livestock-minded folks, we kind of get stuck sometimes in not remembering that not everybody understands what we're doing. And so interesting, like what you just said, we hired a new chief marketing officer this year who lives in the city of Buffalo. And she said to me, I thought all the animals in the barns were brought in by the fair. I didn't realize that there are people out there that show their animals in a competition. And when I said, it's kind of like the Westminster Dog Show, it's the same thing, only with livestock or different species. And she's like, well, that totally makes sense now that you say that. But she also said, I didn't know if I was allowed to go into the barns. I didn't know if I was allowed to touch the animals. Sometimes it feels like a place maybe that we don't belong if you don't understand it. And so I think that perspective really has given us a push to create spaces that people feel welcome to walk into, and that we created a new space this year called Fair Bears Farmland. And it was all based on some of those comments that Allie made, is make it a place where there are livestock, maybe not 500 of them, but livestock that they can get up and close and personal to. They can talk to the exhibitor. They can do some hands-on stuff, make it fun and creative, and send them down through the rest of the barns after that. So we created that exhibit based on that very same concern or comment, Ron.
Yeah, that's great. And I also think, like, just using a sports analogy, I worked a little bit in Florida at the state fair for a little while, and I thought about like sports. Like, could we kind of make the stories of the kids that are bringing up this, interesting, like, your rivalry with poor little Freddie and all those things, like, because that's what gets people interested, just like the Olympics, right? Or when Larry Bird and Magic Johnson were playing basketball, that rivalry, or that just their story about success they've had or things they've overcome, might just generate some interest that the person's gonna maybe see them show or just read about it, I guess, is because that's your goal, is to educate, right?
Right. And every fair and every exhibitor has one of those stories, and multiple of those stories. We do some commentary in our shows that does explain, why the dairy cattle exhibitors are wearing white, what the show stick is for, what it does, just different things like that, knowing that not everybody understands. But I still think there's room for improvement. We can still do better. And as an industry, certainly, there's that fine line between making it something that the exhibitors want and need, and still making it something that the fairgoers want and need.
Yes. Now with social media, with all the things you can do little stories, little vignettes on each, competition with their rabbit Fluffy and their thing over here and their cow or whatever. Just, I think it just there's a lot of opportunity there to really make it pretty cool and have more people involved, and then hopefully learn about food and where their food comes from and all the messages you're trying to get out there for people.
For sure. I mean, our whole preface is to educate and entertain. And there's ways to do that, just like you just mentioned with the livestock piece. Definitely.
Yeah, that's great. Yep. So after when you showed as a kid, you got a job in the front office first. Is that where you started? And
I did. I was actually making maple syrup with a cousin of mine, and a person was there, and he said, are you looking for a job while you're in college? And I thought, sure. I always had 2 or 3 jobs and was a hard worker. So I came in and interviewed with his wife at the time, and she ran the competitive exhibits and credentials office. So I started out with her in the summer of '96 and worked a few summers with her while I was in college. I kind of built my schedule around being able to come to the fairgrounds a couple days a week, and started with the front desk as well. And the manager at the time when I graduated from college hired me and said, look, I can't pay you a lot. I can't offer you health insurance, but I think you're a good fit here. And so I took the job. I stayed. And then as time went along, the next manager came in and his secretary had left. And the guy who hired me, Lloyd Lamb, said, you should apply for that secretary job. And I said, I don't want to be a secretary. And he said, no, I think you should apply for the job. It's going to lead to good places for you. So I did apply. I was hired in that role. So I was the executive secretary for Denny Lang. And then as time went on, I was named the assistant fair manager. And actually, October 1st, so today in 2017, wow. I was hired as the CEO fair manager. So it's been a fun ride. But, I will say, Ron, having people who believe in you more than you believe in yourself at that point in time, that's what it takes sometimes.
Yeah, and getting, because I'm sure I had a similar experience in my life, so I think about it. But as being his secretary or essentially assistant, you probably learned so many things about the fair, and you were doing jobs that if you were the competitive exhibits person, you would have run competitive exhibits. But being his assistant or secretary, you probably learned about everything, and even got to do some things you otherwise wouldn't have gotten to
Exactly.
do.
Exactly. And I think just sitting in the rooms, in the meetings, just taking notes, listening,
Hmm.
understanding the thought process behind what was being said or what was being done and why, those are the kinds of things that maybe at the moment I didn't understand fully what I was learning or being prepared for, but I'm glad I had the opportunity.
To do it. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So there's so many there's so many now. My Tim, who just interviewed you for one of our stories there, remarked to me, and because kind of being in the industry and doing stuff, you don't always notice, but you're one of quite a few women managers now, or running big state fairs. You're really part of a big. It's really changed quite a bit in the last, I don't know, 10 years maybe even. Um, have you been cognizant of that role, or is it just kind of something like you got the job and you're running, or do you take a lot of responsibility for being a female and mentoring others in the role?
I'm aware of the changes that are happening in our industry. When I first started going to conventions and whatnot, it was definitely a male dominated industry. That didn't bother me because so was the agriculture industry that I grew up in. I watched my dad and mom run the farm, and people would come in and ask my dad about something related to the cows. And my dad would say, ask her, ask my mom. She's the one who knows. But people would always come in and ask my dad first. I tell you that because when I was hired, I was the first female manager of the Erie County Fair. Probably, although I don't know this for sure, the youngest at the time as well. The local paper wanted to do a story about those facts. And
Mm-hmm.
I said, I will do a story, but I don't want that to be the story. If the story is I'm the right person for the job and here's why, and by the way, I happen to be female and young, great. But if the story was just about being female or being young, I really wasn't interested in the story. But I'm following you. There is a big shift in our industry, and that's great. But I also had a conversation with a gentleman a couple years ago when I was watching at a convention about the people who graduate from the institute and the people who are winning scholarships. It was actually Greg Stewart. He and I were talking, and he goes, "Where are all the guys?" I said, "I don't know, Greg, but it's all female up there, and I don't think that's intentional."
Yeah, and it's not even. I think you're right with the intentional thing. Was you know, I mean, I've noticed it, I guess, on a thing, but it didn't like go, oh my gosh, this thing. And then Tim, I guess, not having been in the industry or whatever, like he there was another fair manager, and it was like a ethnicity thing, like the first whatever, and he's like, should we do a story on that? I said, I don't know that it's the first, honestly, because I never really thought about it. But I said maybe ask him or her, and that person didn't know that they were the first. So it was like not like they just felt like they were the best candidate for the job. They got the job, and they did a great job with it, and everything else. So it's I don't know. It's definitely been a shift. And like you said, I don't know if it's intentional, but it's certainly done something. But as far as just observing the industry or being in the industry, if it's a man or it's a woman or whoever's in it, if they're competent and they do a great job, but it's awesome. It's great.
I think for me, I don't look at things like that. And I'll tell you a quick story. We were at a conference, walked into a fair, they take your picture, at the beginning. And at the end of the night, my boss at the time said, "Hey, look at that picture." And I looked at it and I really had an epiphany. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm short." And he kind of laughed. He's like, "No kidding." And I'm like, "No, I didn't know." And
No,
he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "I
no.
didn't realize standing next to you that I am that short." And he goes, you're kind of slow if that's the case." And I'm like, in my mind, we're the same age, we're the same size, we're the same height, we're the same everything. I really don't look at people by age, sex, weight, color,
Yeah.
grab the rope. If you can pull it in the same direction to me, I really don't care. And so it really was. It was an epiphany for me because I
That's
don't
funny.
look at people like that.
That's interesting. Same thing with getting older as we age a little bit. Like in the industries, I talked to Marla a little bit about that too. Is the industry, when I first got in the industry, in the '90s or whatever, it seemed like everybody was pretty old, and aging out. But now, especially at the national level, people are a little younger. But do I notice that? I don't really. I mean, I interact with people and I do the things where it comes in the most. In all honesty, is with references. Like if I reference a movie, like I coach a tennis team too, and the girls are all in high school, and I said something about the Beatles, and they like looked at me like I was crazy, like none of them knew who the Beatles were, and I was like, how do you not know who the Beatles are? So those things, it hits you a little bit as you get older because your frame of reference changes a little bit, or music or whatever it might be. But in general, like you said, if you can pull the rope or you can do the job, you don't feel it. You don't feel it a lot. A couple of years ago, at the national convention, actually, I had some Disney stars. I was doing a thing where I had this, where some Disney stars would do like a show, and I thought it was the greatest thing. I said, "This is what fairs need. They need a show to appeal to kids and do that." And at the time, it's been a little while where it was still a little older. All these people, and I had some of the stars in my booth, and people were just walking by these fair. I had no idea. And then finally, that somebody had brought it, like their granddaughter or their kid or something like that, and they freaked out like the Beatles were there. Here's my Beatles reference again. Like the Beatles were there, but it made me think about it. It's like these people are buying talent to appeal to younger kids, and they have no idea. They think that the little fire truck puppet show or whatever is going to appeal to these kids, and they're not interested. But here you had somebody that was actually a star for them, and nobody even noticed. So that made me think about those things a little bit.
And I also would think, though, Ron, on the flip side, is that if everything was geared to that age group, the Disney stars age group, we would lose some of our tradition and maybe some of our roots. I often say that part of the success of the Erie County Fair is because our board has a little more gray hair and our staff is pretty young, but because together we make a great unit. But if we were all young or all had gray hair, maybe it wouldn't be as successful.
No, you need to. I mean, we're everything about the fair business, I always say, is broad, is big numbers. It's like you don't want, when I'm talking about a marketing thing or doing something like that or management, I said, the fair can't have one person at $5. You need 5 people at $1 all the time. If it's revenue neutral, you always want to go with more unless you have, some restraints on your physical plant or something else, but most really don't. But in general, you want to be a far-reaching business, and the more people you reach out to, and I know we're doing a lot of jobs now with the Hispanic community, figuring out what works for music. I have a fair that I run in New York, and experimenting now with what works and what's going to appeal to people, because you say, oh, I'll just get Spanish music, like I'm a genius or something. I said, well, do you want Mexican or do you want the Guatemalan? Or I was like, there's different ones. They speak Spanish. They should all, in your mind, you're thinking that. And you say, wow, it's really a diverse thing. I have to figure out if Tejana and this kind of music and that kind of music. And you got to figure it out because, if you're going to appeal to the growing segment of your population, you got to be in tune with it to a certain extent.
Right.
Have you done a lot in the Hispanic realm with music or with events or things like that going on?
We have not. That is not really indicative of our market right now. Mm-hmm. Not right now, but I can see probably down the road.
Yeah, it's just not like a lot of choices, and where I feel like I was saying the old guy trying to pick a young person's music. I felt the same way because I was at, but even at the national convention, there weren't a lot of, I talked to some of my friends that are in the entertainment booking industry. They didn't know a whole lot about Spanish either. I think you need sort of like a specialized industry to do it. But then on the other hand too, I always like to work with people I know that I can trust, and then reaching out to someone new, I'm like, how can I trust this person? It might be sending me 4 guys they found in the street for all I know, rather than the Beatles of the Hispanic community that I know.
Well, I think it also requires just taking a leap, right? Like sometimes it's just that.
We just don't want to leap off a cliff, though.
That is true. That is true.
Doing things. So when you first took over as manager, what were some of your goals? What did you look at? You had 2 pretty successful guys right before you doing some great jobs. So That's always harder. It's nice when you come into a place and they were doing a terrible job. You just come in and say, "I'm going to fix everything." But when you have a successful operation before you, what are your focuses? What are you looking at?
At that point in time when I came in, I was really focused on, and still am actually, focused on building bench strength within our team. At that point, it was the CEO at the time, myself, and then kind of everybody else. And there wasn't a lot of bench strength. And so growing our next set of leaders has been a focus of mine. Giving people opportunities. It's been really great to see them take challenges and products and projects that maybe I touched initially and watch them do it way better than I ever could. So that part has been really, really fun. I enjoy that piece. It comes with its challenges. But that is one thing that we wanted to, or I wanted to do when I started. I think the other thing is just continuing to focus on the agriculture education, and helping the community.
Yeah, because the fair is the community. Having that community thing, I always say because I work sometimes with people that have like private fairs, like run them, on a parking lot or do something or put together a fair, and advertising can get you a lot of people, but that community stuff and that elbow grease you got to do to build up the community, like having, whether it's competitions or dance studios perform or whatever it is, that's you really need that base because that's what makes you sound from the bottom up and can really expand a lot. So
right.
There's a lot to do with the fair itself. So you had I was talking to Matt Walsmith at South Florida Fair, and he came from the financial side. So I asked him, what his big challenges might be, because he didn't know a lot about marketing, let's say, or something else. But you had a pretty diverse background in all aspects by the time you took over. So you were.
I did. I mean, I was fortunate that I've worked in almost every department on the fairgrounds by the time I got here. I remember we had a receptionist at one time kind of struggling a little bit. And I said, I've sat where you've sat. I can help you with this and help you understand the dynamics of this. And I remember her looking at me going, really? And I'm like, sure, long time ago. But this is my 28th fair. Wow. Feel like I have a good handle on things, but Ron, anybody who tells you they manage this size of fair and they know everything of every piece of what's going on at every moment, they're lying. I learn stuff still every day.
What number fair is this for you coming up? New York has such a long tradition of
185.
108. The Orange County Fair, which I manage, is I think we're 183 or just did 183 or something like that. And people was like, where did it get started? I have no idea. It's like 180 years ago.
Well, I think it kind of just what you just said. I wasn't here for the first fair 185 years ago, and I won't be here for the one 185 years from now. So our job as staff and board is to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to in our due diligence and taking care of it, so that when the next set of staff and board take over, they have something worth keeping going and with a strong tradition.
So you're there like 2 years, and then all of a sudden a pandemic comes.
Ugh.
Exactly. Awful. So obviously they neglected to train you in that part about the global pandemic part. Did you call them up? I'm sure you tried to get advice, but I mean everybody did. But what challenges did you face, and how'd you navigate that?
New York, I think, was a little bit different than some of my counterparts around the country. We didn't open up like others did, and we were locked down longer than others were. So that created some challenges. I know I had a Zoom call with somebody who, basically from Florida, who said, you're not trying hard enough. And I'm like, you're not living here. Mm-hmm. You don't understand what it's like here.
Right.
So challenges like everybody else had, just figuring out what to do next, how to handle it. And that was the challenge, right? Nobody had a handbook, or nobody had anybody they could call or ask. So that in itself was the biggest challenge. Some good things that came out of it. I think there were some really good connections made within the industry, some good friendships that they would call each other and say, hey, how are you handling this? And for us, what we did is we created what we called the East Coast Fairs Group. And it was just a handful of people. 3 of us had the same carnival midway. 2 others ran right around our dates. And so we get on the Zoom probably once a month and just talk about where they were in the process. So after we realized, and I remember, asking one of my coworkers, are we going to cancel this fair? And I just am not letting my passion see that. And he said, no, I think we're going to be okay. And I'm like, we're going to have to cancel this fair. And that was in April.
Mm.
In May 26th or 27th, we canceled the fair. And I remember struggling with a couple of things. The first thing I struggled with is I was asking our very small staff at the time to keep going on projects, trying to get them to think about the what ifs, the hows, the whys. And I knew in my heart of hearts that we were going to have to cancel the fair. So I felt like I was lying to them. And that really bothered me.
Mm.
And a friend of mine, Jerry Hammer from the Minnesota State Fair at the time, emailed me and he said, you're not lying to them. You're praying for the Hail Mary. And so that helped me reframe my mind. But the second thing is when we canceled the fair, I knew that the following day or a couple days later that I would be furloughing 2/3 of our staff. And that was awful. That was awful. So you're standing in front of all these microphones and you're talking about the process and how things are going to go forward, knowing in the back of your mind that tomorrow I need to get on a Zoom call with our staff and share some news that nobody should ever have to deliver or hear. So we did the best that we could. We kept a lot of people on payroll. We kept their health insurance covered for 6 months. We did everything we could, that always trying to remember, if I were in their shoes, what would make this easier? Because I can't change it. We had to make wise short-term decisions to make sure we had a long-term. So that was wild. And then in 2021, it was even kind of more strange because in 2020, everybody canceled. It was just like, all right, nothing's happening anywhere. Don't worry about it. Set it aside. Be with your family. But in 2021, it almost was more difficult because some fairs opened, some fairs didn't, some were at a capacity limit, some weren't. And then, even if you would have asked me, somebody did ask me at Thanksgiving time, do you think we'll have a 2021 fair? And I'm like, I don't know. And then we planned for a fair at 33% capacity with all of this thought process in it. And then on May 17th, we got the go-ahead for that 33% fair. And on June 15th, it literally came out that you can have a fair that looks like 2019. And I'm like, we're 60 to 80 days before the fair. No, we can't. We won't have the bodies. Some things have already left the tracks. No, we can't. And I don't know that the general public nor our officials that just said, okay, yeah, go ahead and do whatever you were doing in 19 understood that can't happen. Not in 60 to 80 days. And so it really was, it was a challenge. There were fairs in New York that canceled still in 2021 because they ran out of time. It wasn't their fault. They weren't given guidance early enough to actually do it. And that created a little, I think within the community, it was like, well, how come this fair can't run, but Erie County can? And it's like, you know what? Ugh, people are crazy.
No, the rule, like in Orange County, I went up in 2020 when we closed, and then but in the fall I did the fair food drive-through, and I did a Christmas thing. I was just doing things like you said to just keep some people working that were dependent upon the fair. I don't live up there, but I do a lot of work with them. So I went up and I said I'll just run a couple of events, and I ran this. I literally 6 weeks lead time. I ran a stupid Christmas event, but just kept people working, and the people came in the cars and they were happy, and they did all that, and that was great. But when you talk about the laws, they have a racetrack there in New York. They started running races because they have a drive-in, so the cars would come, they'd park, and they watch a race. Do you know they threatened to take their liquor license away because they said I forget what they said. They said you can't do this because you're not he said, but you can have a drive-in movie theater. Yes, but you can't do that because it's a live event. And it was just so arbitrary, and then being in my role, working with fairs all over the country and different things, it was such a disconnect because I was talking to people in, say, the capital region that I do some advertising for. And, she was like, what do you think the fair will be like in 2021? I said, it'll be great. I said, there's fairs that have ran already. They have big numbers. You think people will come? I said, I know they'll come. I see it, because I'm looking at other states and other things that have actually happened. But that really showed me that look, you're fortunate because you have a great network of people, but some of those fairs that are a little more isolated up there, they just would talk to their other, fairs around the capital region, let's say, and they would all be commiserating together, and they didn't see maybe all the things that were going on nationwide, which showed them. So it was scary. It was scary. And like I said, every place was so different. The way they dealt with it, it was almost crazy. It was like you're on a different planet. I was talking to New York, and I was talking to Florida or South Carolina, and it was like they were from two different worlds. It wasn't even the same place.
You have to remember, Ron, too, that and this really brought it to light for me. I had a friend at my house in October of 2021. That person's from the Midwest. We were watching the local news, just chit-chatting, and across the bottom of the news, it was a ticker. This many positives, this many deaths, this many percents, and whatever. October of 2021. And that person said to me, is that new? I said, that has been every day since February of 2020. And I said, wait a minute, you're not seeing this in your local news? Never did. Only when things were really radical. Otherwise, they never did. So even though we had a 2021 fair and it was fine, but you have to remember, I think certain sectors of our country heard a different story than other sectors of our country.
Yeah, absolutely.
For us to still hear that, and remember, we shut down again at Thanksgiving of 2021 in New York. Like it wasn't, I would talk to Jeremy Parsons in Iowa, and he's like, no, it's great. Everything's good. And I'm like, that's not where we're at.
California were the two ones that just were sort of outliers with me. I mean, that just observation of talking to people, it was like a whole different world. It was.
We had a sizable livestock show booked here for the first time, and that livestock show left New York and held that show in Ohio. Same livestock show,
right?
Same virus, but I couldn't. I even wrote to the commissioner. I'm like, we're losing business because they're going to places that they can run these events. It was a hard thing to wrap our mind around. It was a hard thing to explain to people, like the gentleman who's like, you're not trying hard enough. I'm like, you are not living in New York.
Yeah.
It's a different environment here. And it was for not just 1 year, but I would say a good couple of years.
Well, that's the one thing that struck me always is like, because at some point it becomes just observational. I mean, people were operating, people were okay, and and it took a really long time after they should have seen data and said, you know what, okay, maybe we were very, very conservative as far as the shutdown, but now we see what's going on. But that I kept expecting that to happen, but it never came until, like you said, all of a sudden one day they're just like, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And I think, I've shared this story with some of my fair friends in the Midwest meeting, but that whole experience had more of an impact on me and our staff than I ever thought it did. We also went through a couple other changes at that time. And so I asked David Watts to come and speak to us. And David is a past law enforcement officer, but also a psychologist. And he sat at the table with us, and it was January of 22. And we talked through this whole process. And it was my opportunity to be able to share with the staff some of my thoughts and my feelings that maybe they hadn't heard yet. How I decided who was furloughed and who didn't, and the things that I was seeing that maybe they weren't privy to, and the things we went through. And I remember one of the staff members saying, how are you not in therapy? And I said, what do you think we're doing today? Mm-hmm. And he basically framed it out to say, this isn't the first time this organization's been on hard times. It won't be the last, and you will be okay. And it was like the first time that we actually had the funeral for everything that happened, for the death that we experienced. And afterwards, he said, I know you're not going to want to do this, but you need to take and document everything, print every email, everything you can find, and you need to put it in your archives, because someday
Yeah.
when another set of staff or board may need to rely on what you went through to get them through something. So if you go in our archives right now, there's a big fat envelope that says, to the next set of staff, I hope you never need this, but if you do, here it is. And it's everything.
Wow. Sounds like one of those like science fiction movies where they
Right? Felt like it too.
So post COVID though, or after the pandemic, on the entertainment side, do you see a lot of changes? I mean, obviously with the big name entertainment, it's become really tough game to play, and but even on the free act side, there's less animal acts. At least my observation from working and different things. What do you see? What's
I see less animal acts. I see less entertainers, period. I had a conversation with Hilby, the skinny German jungle boy at our fair this year, who is fantastic. And I said, Hilby, who's the next Hilby? Because honestly, if my kids signed up and said, hey, I'm going to ride a unicycle, juggle, and make people laugh for a living, I'd be like, okay, now it's time to get a real job. But I don't see that next group of people coming in. And Ron, I'd also say, I don't see that in commercial sales booths either. We lost a number of people who either retired out of the business, went from 4 stands to 3, or whatever the situation may be, and they're not coming back. You know, being able to buy whatever you want online has hurt that industry. And I don't know where it'll end up going. But I would say the entertainment pieces and the commercial sales pieces especially took a hard hit.
You know, and I might be delusional, but I think I was hoping some of the commercial sales stuff is because of staffing, because I do get that a lot. They don't have the people, so I'm hopeful that thing. But in my mind, also the ability to taste, touch, feel, see a thing in person. I don't know that that's ever going to, I hope not, completely go away. I'm really hopeful because we're the best at that, because where else can you know, I can put a sign on a baseball game and, you know, say my product is this, but I can go to the Erie County Fair and I can taste it, or I can sample it, or I can try it, and I can, you know, interact with people. I hope that that's never going to go away.
I think for people my age and your age, yes. I would wonder if you asked my kids or somebody younger what their statement would be, who grew up ordering whatever they want online.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know that they would have the same answer. I don't know that. Maybe. You know, I think people seem to really like these special experiences, but would they shop for something in a commercial sales building, or would they buy it online? I don't know.
You still get a new thing though. Yeah, I mean, don't you have to taste? I have a bunch of kids, and I talk to them all the time about that very thing. Like, you know, and the differences are, you know, if I pay for something in cash, my daughter think like I'm a drug dealer or something. They're like, "What is that?" And I'm like, it's cash. So,
funny story. My daughter went to travel this past week. My husband gave her a couple bucks to put in her pocket. And before we left, she goes, Mom, can you take me to the bank so I can put this in my bank and just use my card? True story.
My one daughter wouldn't touch it because it's dirty change. She's like, you never take change. I was like, what are you, crazy? But yeah, I am hopeful that, you know, people still need to interact together and be together and maybe try things together. What about on the music side? Have you had a real hard time with booking acts and what they get? It's crazy. I mean, you know, I skirt in that business a little bit, and it's just crazy to me the amount of money people are getting and what they're charging and all those things.
Music's been tough. One thing that was really great about the 2021 fair is that gave us the ability to just try some crazy stuff, right? So I remember saying to our buyer, hey, I'm following this kid on TikTok and he's fantastic. What about booking him this year?
Right.
And I said, am I crazy? And he said, Jess, you're the craziest chick I know. Just do it, because this is the year that you're going to, there are 0 expectations this year. Mm-hmm. So try it. Well, now he's being booked. It was Cooper Allen. Now he's being booked everywhere. And he did a fantastic show. Great guy, great, just down to earth guy. But I think the expectations from our guests are higher and higher and higher. and the cost of entertainment is higher and higher and higher. You know, when you look at entertainment bid sheets from last year to this year, there are some that very, very, very few are down. Most are up, and a good handful are up 100 grand or more. And I think the challenge is our guests think we'll book Taylor Swift.
Right.
But they don't understand that you book an artist and you do a guarantee, and it doesn't matter if you sell one ticket or 10,000, you still pay that artist that price. They don't understand how this works. They also don't understand the routing and all the extra expenses that goes along with it. It is getting tough, and Buffalo has a huge saturation of music. You know, would last year in April, believe it or not, in Buffalo, Luke Combs played the outdoor stadium. Would we book Luke Combs? No, but we would have booked the support acts that came with Luke Combs that now can't because they were just here. So it's a tough game.
It's a tough game. Yeah, in Orange County, I don't know if you're familiar, but back in the day, we used to have like Van Halen and Metallica and Guns N' Roses and people they email me like, why can't you book? Those guys. I said, well, you have no. I mean, they just have no idea. It's hard to explain because they have no clue how things work. I said I could book some really good tribute bands that sound a lot like them and do things like that, but it's between that and I'm sure you get this a lot is what do you do the other 50 weeks of the year?
Oh my gosh, all the time. All the time. And actually, Ron, for those that really want to hear an answer, usually I'll tell them the 12 days of the fair are long. My days are long, but they're honestly some of my easier days because 500 people show up to help us get the job done. The rest of the year, it's myself and 49 other people pulling the rope for the rest of the facilities. And it is our days are busy.
Yeah. It cracks me up. I get that you get that all the time.
Or did you take a nice long vacation?
Yeah, no. I hibernate. I'm like a bear. I go to sleep on the last day of the fair, and then I wake up next year, turn the lights on, and we're all set to go.
Right.
You were talking about the acts and where they come from, and I forgot to say this for a second, but I find things weird places. But I was having dinner at this place, and the TV was on, and they had this goofy show on that just had videos of people doing crazy things like stunts and acts and that. And I saw about 4 or 5 of them. I said, that would make a fantastic fair act. And I wonder if I don't know who would curate it, or is it the booking agents? But are they like searching the internet to do it? Because I think there are a ton of opportunities out there where they can come from. Because I saw, like I said, 5 or 6 in a half hour. I was watching the stupid show that would be, I thought, fantastic for what's going on. So who knows? I mean, maybe there are opportunities. We're just not looking in the right places.
Well, and I think, we use for grounds entertainment, we use Mellowship Entertainment. JJ and Annalise book our grounds entertainment. And I know that they're looking at stuff in Vegas. I know they're looking at stuff like on America's Got Talent and things like that. I think the bigger question, Ron, would be do those acts know that fairs could be a springboard for them?
Right.
We might be looking, but then you have to get them, because the act in Vegas might be just a little bit different than what needs to happen at a fair or America's Got Talent versus a fair. But sometimes those fair dates can be a springboard for them into something bigger.
And then they need to get the logistics. They need some sort of presentation, unless they're doing something around, at a bigger fair like yours, it's a little easier. But at some smaller fairs, they probably need to have some sort of, backdrop or presentation to make it. And they need a show. If they just have like a human cannibal, they just get shot out of the can. It's 10 minutes. What do you do for the rest of the time? It's got to be a show, and there has to be some patter and all those things. But I don't know, maybe I'm too hopeful. I am hopeful that there's opportunities in things like that where maybe we're just not looking in the right, because you get set in your ways. I guess for years people just came to them to a certain extent, but now maybe we have to identify some people and bring them into the industry instead of.
I think we're going to have to.
Yeah.
To service the number of fairs in our country, and for those retirements that are impending, we're going to have to, because unless they're out there and I'm just not seeing them, which is entirely possible, but there's no backfill coming in.
I mean, I book probably, I don't know, for 20 different fairs. I book something, during the course of a year. Sometimes the Flores family, one year I booked them 32 weeks or something like that of the different events I did. But, you go and you see the, the sort of the mini circus thing with a Globe of Death and 2 other things. And I see like 85 racing pigs and some other things here and there, but that's the majority of it. And it's like, okay, where's the lions and tigers or the bears or whatever they used to have, or different things. It's just not a lot.
Well, I think that the animal shows, especially in certain states, are getting tougher and tougher and tougher
Yes.
to run. I mean, we don't have elephants and camels
Mm-hmm.
anymore, things like that in New York. I know other states you can.
New Jersey's out too. Yeah.
Yeah, but those changes are happening too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think the pandemic really did. I have a friend who had a lion and tiger show, and he just the pandemic he was feeding the animals before he fed himself. And when we got out, I called some of my friends, and I got like 20 weeks together for him. But if he wanted to come out, I had 20 straight weeks. But he said it's too much effort to reorganize and do it. So it's a tough thing. Yeah. One thing I did want to ask you about is really interesting. I've been reading a lot about history lately, so it's top of mind. But you were celebrated this year 100 years with straight shows as the carnival, which basically dates back to the beginning of carnivals. Because before the 20s or wherever it was, there wasn't really fairs and carnivals weren't really together. It really started right around then. So that's quite the longevity together. So they're I'm sure have lots of stories and great partners over the years.
Yeah, so that is a pretty special celebration that we had this year. And Straight Shows actually celebrated 100 years in the business last year. So we were able to book them after 1 year of just being in the business. I heard one time someone say anything that's lasted that long really had to be a great idea from the start. And that is true. But I also think it took, just like a partnership or a friendship or a marriage, it also took people on both sides of the coin, nurturing that, being open and honest and communicating to make that last that long. And likely, my guess is, Ron, it'll be likely the only one that ever gets celebrated like that. There are other fairs and carnivals that are close, and maybe they will celebrate 100 years, but it is pretty unheard of and pretty special. It was a great celebration this year to be able to bring the train back into the town of Hamburg for that celebration.
I saw that. That's pretty neat. Yeah.
That was especially to our community, that is a big deal. It is a really big deal. It was really cool to be able to celebrate and do that with the Straits family.
And you said the relationship or marriage, and that's one thing, but this is on a different level because you're 3 and sort of working on 4 generations now with the Straits. It's not just the one for a business to continue all those years, because in the number of carnivals that were around in 1924 today are that still have the same name or slim and none. I mean, I can't even think of more than 2 maybe or 3, and they were around. So the 100 is almost impossible because people change, they get bought out, and they change the name of the show or do something else. But to continue to do that for so long, and there was you got a lot of nice publicity around it too. I saw.
We did. When you think about what changes or things or hardships each the organization, the Ag Society, or Straight Shows has gone through in those 100 years, when you actually sit back and think about all the things that COVID was a big one, right? But it wasn't the only thing they ever went through. And, what they've gone through to get to where they are, that was pretty cool.
I'm sure you have the war, World War II. It was a challenge for carnivals and fairs closed, and a lot of them, that was the only time they closed. So, it's actually in a way comforting. I was reading a couple of histories. One on Conklin shows actually from Canada that the guy just wrote. And they were talking about the war and the struggles. And I saw a lot of parallels with COVID. It's comforting that other people went through the same thing. Like you said, put it in the archives. Because when you think you're the only person that's ever experienced anything like this, even when you're going through it, a lot of times you do. But when you look back, and even when they were complaining in the 1930s or 1940s, they're complaining about the same things they're complaining about now. There's a fuel shortage, or there was, whatever going on, insurance. And it's like, they had the same problems we did. I mean, maybe a, little different twist on it, but it was essentially the same problem that they're experiencing now. So it was comforting in a way to me, because I was like, well, they got through it and we can get through it again, I'm sure. And
right.
I'm too optimistic about everything.
I love it.
That's great. So what are your, nowadays, the big topic is obviously security and, kids and things like that. Have you had many problems with that, or have you weathered it pretty well up there? And what are you doing about it?
I would say that we've weathered it pretty well. First of all, we have a fantastic support from our partners, whether it's town, sheriff, or state police. We have a fantastic security force that we hire that are off-duty retired police officers or law enforcement. But one of the things that I think is unique or different to us is that we have our own mounted security division. And so they are not folks with a law enforcement background, but they're smart folks with great horses and they're great riders.
Oh, wow.
And so for whatever reason, Ron, I think young people may not think twice about, I won't say attacking, but coming after an officer, but they won't touch a horse. Whether it's because they don't know what the horse will do, or because the horse is so much bigger, or if it's because an animal. Our mounted division has really made an impact for a couple of reasons. Number one, because they're on horses. But number two, they can get there faster than most. They can see further because they're higher up. And most times they can contain the situation until the law enforcement partners can get there. Having said that, did we have a lot of problems with that? No, more than we'd like, yes. Our biggest challenge this year, fence jumpers. And actually, believe it or not, one kid jumped in, he left and jumped in. And when our security officers questioned him, he's like, but I have a ticket. And they're like, then why are you jumping in? He's like, well, I wanted to see if I could do it.
I thought you were going to say your biggest problem was the horse poop from the horse.
No, not anymore. They're all bagged now.
Oh, they're bagged, okay. That's the first thing I thought about for some reason.
It used to be.
A lot of cleanup has to go on. That's great. I mean, I have seen a lot of fairs that do contain it, and some fairs are struggling, but I don't know. I think if you have some pretty sound, things in place, whether it's the unaccompanied minors policy or I had a couple of people I work with this year that I never really thought about it, but they had a problem with they had an unaccompanied minors policy, but the parents were literally coming in, dropping the kid off, and then leaving to do the thing. Do you have to get a waiver signed, or what do you need to do? But hopefully that's just a post COVID thing where people went crazy for a couple of years. And
I don't think it is, Ron. I think
it's going to be ongoing.
I think it's going to continue. I had a conversation with somebody about my age yesterday about kids and whatnot, and I said, it's our fault. We raised them. We messed up, and I'm not saying all kids. Of course. There are really great kids in this country doing really great things, but there are some knuckleheads, and I think it's our fault. Mm-hmm. Kids usually will rise to the occasion if they know what the parameters are and the expectations are, but
that's interesting you say that.
Yeah,
because I always think that I think people, when I tend to see, and I don't know if it's like a still there carnival or a fair, but when it gets like at night and it's just the kids and their girlfriends and their boyfriends and whatever, they tend to. But like if grandma is out there and a lot of families, it's weird to act up because you don't want to embarrass yourself in front of people right. You might respect, and I think when they when I see when the crowd thins out a little bit and they feel a little more feeling their oats a little bit, then I tend to see things happen. You can almost tell. It's like I'm not even sure what I'm observing, but I know it when I see it. Like this doesn't.
The energy changes. You feel it.
The energy changes, and it really becomes.
And honestly, kids doing kid stuff, that's one thing.
Sure.
Kids are going to be kids, and we all were once too. But when it becomes a place,
I was perfect as a kid. I never did anything.
Oh, I bet. But it's when it goes beyond that line is when it's a challenge.
Yeah, it becomes a challenge.
Yeah.
So the Erie County Fair, you're not state supported or government supported, right? You're tell us a little about your structure.
So we are a private, not-for-profit membership organization. We're the oldest civic organization in Erie County. So we were founded in 1819. So that's pretty cool. We do get about $12,000 from New York State for premiums, just like every other fair in New York State gets. Right. But in context, we pay out about $154,000 in premiums. So the $12,000 helps, but it certainly doesn't cover the whole thing. We also, in the past, but that is not happening this year, we got $96,000 from the state of New York for a grant, just like every other New York State fair. Outside of that, we get $0 from the state and $0 from the county. We are a private, not-for-profit membership organization.
Yeah. So the decisions you make impact your bottom line. I mean, it's a I think in some ways, honestly, when it really comes down to it, it's a good thing because and I don't want to disparage anybody or anything. I just think it's when you get a lot of money from something, it makes you a little bit lazy. When you
Right.
have to pay attention to the expenses and you're fighting for your life all the time, you pay attention. Well, you just do. It's just just the way it is. So I think those fairs, that survive on their own and do well, they pay attention. We need to get some sponsorships because it's important for our bottom line. It's like, oh, we got some money from the state. We don't need to go look for it.
I think both models each have their benefits and each have their negatives. There are some things that it would be nice to have the budget or the surplus or whatever. But then there's also times it's like, nah, I don't want to have to do that.
There's always strings that come with the money.
Oh, you got that right.
Do the thing. So what's next for the Erie County Fair? What are you looking forward to? What's on your agenda for changes or
for the fair? For the fair itself, I think just focusing on customer experience, making sure that there are experiences for all age groups and all age levels. We did a lot of focusing this year on things that would be for young kids and families. But I think we need to take a look at that teenager to early 20s date night type of things and come up with some experiences for them. We actually have a fair planning meeting tomorrow, so we'll continue going through that. After the fair, our board and our staff sit down together at one table and say, what went right, what went wrong, what do we need to change, what should we scrap, and what should we dream about? And I would say this year's fair, we had a big sticky note for the wins from this year's fair, and it was the longest wins list I think we've ever had. So there were some really good things that we were able to do this year, and just continue to build on that and focus on that customer experience. And obviously, like you said, keep the safety and security in mind and give it another whirl and hopefully have better weather next year.
Yeah, I think that you were talking about the experience for the teenagers or some of the other people. Like I've seen some fairs and I've done some things myself where, instead of just maybe giving away tickets or doing something like that to get in, like the circus, like one time I had the circus do like the hula hoop thing, like they did a demonstration, like the contest was to win an experience.
Oh, cool.
And you can only get, a backstage tour of the Sea Lion show or, things like that. I think if you exploit those areas that they're there, just, think about things that are going to be really special to someone instead of just, here's a couple tickets to the fair or whatever, you win this contest, you win that, or you can do it on social media now with all kinds of things. And, keeping the people engaged and doing things that are really fun and special and different. It might be.
Last year, we started an event called our Membership Prelude, and we have about 550 members of our Ag Society, and they were able to sign up, just 50 of them. And what we did is we took them around the grounds on the tram on Sunday before we open. And then like this year, they got a champagne toast by the carousel. And they got the first ride of the carousel of the season. And then we went and they heard some of the music and got to try some of the new fair foods for the year. Very special, very intimate event. And people love that. People
really an event like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you already have those things on your property. So it's really not. I did tell the group though, I'm like, I feel like I'm letting you in on my favorite little piece of heaven. I love that Sunday night before we open on Wednesday because it's quiet. You can still hear the peepers in the parks and things like that. So I may have ruined it for me, but it has been really fun to bring our members in to experience that.
Those interesting areas where most people don't know about, but there's so many fun things. It's like unlimited. It blows your mind almost how many possible things if you start brainstorming about it that you can possibly do at the fair and make an experience really neat. I think a lot of people are experimenting with these sort of VIP things, which is kind of what you maybe touched on a little bit about. Maybe there are tours or experiences or things you can do that might be revenue streams or ways to do things that they're not doing now. So, I think as an industry, people continue to look for new places to go and new foods. We've done a great job with that, right? Introducing all the different crazy foods out there that might be available to people. So, just keep working at it.
Yeah, there's something we can do there with the livestock and animal side too. We started years ago a program called Fair Camp, and we bring in kids 8, 9, and 10 years old
I love
with
that.
with a parent or grandparent, and they sleep in the barns. And they help us, they stay here from Friday through Sunday. And at the end on Sunday, we pair them up with a livestock exhibitor, and they have their own livestock show. So that maybe when they're older and bringing their kids to the fair, they can go in and watch a dairy cattle show and say, I did this as a kid, even though I never grew up on a farm and never had that background. I did this as a kid at fair camp. Or they work in a concession. They help fill cannolis or make cotton candy and understand how the concession stand
Right.
work.
The concessions are different.
Yeah.
So is it all-encompassing fair camp?
Yes, it's not
It was
just
an
like,
all-encompassing fair. I did a fair in the summer once, and I thought about doing different, like circus camp,
yeah,
concession camp, agricultural camp. You could really make a big business out of that in the middle of summer.
yeah, it's pretty
Doing
cool.
different things.
It's pretty
It
cool.
really is.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your information. I'm sure we could have gone another 2 hours or something with all
I
the
think
things
so.
you do.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, and have a great rest of your year and your time off for the next 50 weeks or however many weeks.
Yeah, right? Awesome.
Thanks so much, Jessica. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ron.
This podcast is brought to you by Innovative Ticketing is the ticketing source made for the amusement industry. Our staff of professionals can guide you through your setup, assist with customer service, even on the weekends when you most need it, and help increase your sales through promotions that work. Innovative Ticketing is the ticketing source made for the amusement industry. Sign up today at innovativeticketing.com.